feel a bit furtive doing this. I feel like I shouldn't be out here doing it. The secretiveness has got to me. Wow.
Is that your first truffle?
That is my first truffle.
So in December, that'll be going for £1,000 a kilo, so £1 a gram. But what you tended to find is when you met a truffle hunter with a pig, he was missing his middle fingers.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Wild Food People podcast. Now, I'm recording this intro out in the woods during a break in our coppicing work because this episode needs a bit of introduction. There's a couple of things in there. One is that every now and again there's a dog barking in the background. The dog is key to the show. The dog is the whole reason the content is being recorded, but it's a little bit noisy and unexpected, so we've muted that where possible, but we have had some feedback from the patrons who've already listened to this episode that a warning would be nice. So there's a dog barking every now and again. And setting up what this episode is, well, last month we went out with Jonathan McGowan, John the Truffle, as he is in my phone, and his dog Tembo, and we went looking for wild truffles in North Wales, which, if you know something about truffles and truffle hunting, you know that North Wales is famous for not having truffles there, or they haven't been found here for 70 years, except Jonathan's found them, and he took us to where he found them. So that's what we're doing in this episode.
My name's Jonathan McGowan, and I'm a truffle hunter. Together with my lagotto romagnolo, Tembo, we hunt for truffles. So we've been hunting for about 5 years now. I've been a student of truffles for probably 20 years. And very excitingly, last December, after years and years of hunting, we found wild truffles in Wales for the first time in 72 years.
What happens next? We're at the edge of a wood. We're staring at it's kind of a plantation. It's a mid-20th century beechwood plantation, but on top of ancient forest that was here before. So what would you do next?
Okay, so Tembo is always on. So I don't give him the command as such to find the truffle. He's always on. He's always alert, and he's got this fantastic nose that enables him to seek out the truffle. This is pre-match excitement.
This is pre-match excitement. I like that. This is his world he's going into.
Yeah.
This is what he wants to be doing all the time anyway, and you just let it. He's only able to do it a small amount of the time.
Look, he's the star of the show. I'm his driver.
Right.
You know, I study the maps. I put him in the right location, and then he goes to work. I mean, the way that typically truffle hunters work, once they've got a territory, they're in and out. You know, it's ninja style. They'll do a loop of an area where they've found them in the past, and then it'll be back in the car onto the next location and the next location and the next location. It's not about 3-4 hour loops at a time. It's once you've got that knowledge, it's in and out.
Yeah, it's like all mushroom foraging, I suppose, that you are targeting that one mycelial area, the area that you know you have found those fruiting bodies before on that ground in those conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'd say is there's a mycelial battle that goes on actually between the mushrooms and the truffles. Yeah. So what we tend to see in some of the plantations anyway that and the truffle, the farm truffles that I see, we'll see what's called a brule. So it will be a burnt area around the base of the tree, which is the mycelium killing off all of the grass and the competition. And actually, some of the best truffle spots are the ones where there's no competing mushrooms.
That's interesting. So you almost want somewhere that's devoid of other mushrooms, maybe.
Yeah, that's an indicator for us. And again, we talk about playing the percentages to our benefit. That's again one of those little edges that over time we learn.
We did record more in this segment, but it's not really of much use because it's just me giving a narrative of wandering around in a wood, following Jonathan and Tembo, and them not finding truffles because this particular woodland didn't work. They're just not there, not detectable, not there at this time of year. So we went off to a different woodland, which is where Jonathan found those truffles around 12 months or so ago. And this is what it sounds like.
Challenge is we don't know if somebody else has worked the area. We don't know whether sometimes certain spots are later on in the year, and we're still fairly early for this part of the country. It's a little bit higher up than other truffle spots, certainly in the south and west of the country. So there could be a little bit of variation in terms of height that we're at the moment. But I'm confident we'll find some today.
Because you don't know that you're the only person working
No,
in this
that's correct.
woodland.
There could have been 5 people that have come through this morning that I just don't know about. So there is that element of the unknown.
If you see the same breed of dog elsewhere, there's a good chance that's what they're up to.
Look, I mean, the lagotto is famous for it, but you can train any dog with a decent nose to find truffles. So there could be incognito truffle dogs in all over the place, and I just don't know them.
Have you ever met anyone out in the woods with a pig on a lead yet?
The pigs are kind of myths now. So the pigs were infamous truffle hunters probably the last century and the century before. But what you tended to find is when you met a truffle hunter with a pig, he was missing his middle fingers.
Yeah. Are we on?
Yeah.
Are we on?
What a good boy.
That's huge.
Wow.
Good boy, Tembo. What have you found, Tembo? Good boy. Good boy. So every time he finds a truffle, he gets a piece of sausage.
Jesus.
So this one...
That's
good boy.
huge. Reverse questions.
Yeah.
How much would that be worth if you sold it?
Okay, so, I mean, if you look at that side, that side's perfect. If the whole thing was perfect, it's probably 120 grams worth of truffle.
Yep.
So current market price fluctuates between now, so the season is, for the British truffle, is September through to December, pretty much. So in December, that'll be going for £1,000 a kilo, so £1 a gram. Right now, it's about 70p a gram, so £700 a kilo.
So that's 70 or 80 quid I've got in my hand
Yeah.
there.
In perfect condition. That obviously has got some damage, so it'd be worth less than that, but perfect condition truffle, yeah.
This is fantastic because we were just talking about something else. I was blathering on about stuff. We weren't recording, and then Tembo just dived off on the side of the track. Yeah. Is this the kind of terrain you would find a truffle in normally?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so we talked about relatively flattish, shallow, predominantly beech wood, around about 70 years. We talked about the saplings filling in the gaps. If you look to the southwest, we can see the dappled light coming through the trees. So absolutely perfect conditions for wild Welsh truffles and indeed British truffles.
There's a real rush of excitement that I got when Tembo found that truffle. It's like, it feels a little bit like...
No, hold on, before you say anything, I'll give you my perspective on it.
All right, go for it,
Right,
yeah.
so I've been an angler all of my life.
Yep.
And I love sitting behind a rod, or I don't fly fish, but I can imagine a similar kind of trait, and just seeing that rod tip bend round.
Yes.
And you go from perfectly calm, sitting in nature, to the adrenaline rush and then battle with the fish. It's a similar kind of feeling to me.
That's fantastic, because that's where I was going to with it. So I was
Okay.
going to say that, say if you like deer stalking or shooting or something like that, you're stalking upon something, you come across something, you're watching it for a while, you're not doing snapshots on deer, you're looking at that animal in that landscape going, okay, is this safe? Is that appropriate? Is that the right species? So you have all of that, and there's almost like an anxiety that comes up before that and the relief with the shot. Fishing is the opposite way around. You're standing there bored and then something happens.
Yeah.
And that's out of the blue. And yeah, that it sums it up perfectly, is that first strike on the rod.
Yeah.
So do you think there's an element of that drives you forward to keep going and looking for more?
I think it's the same feeling. And as I said, I've been an angler all of my life, and I now find myself truffle hunting for pleasure far more than I do going fishing.
Yeah. Do you think it's something maybe coded into you, coded
Oh,
into humans?
I think it's inherent within man and his desire in the past to hunt. I think it's coming out in me in this way, and that partnership with my dog makes it even more special.
Yeah, but that's again an ancient trait, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the dogs are just wolves we tricked into being mates with us.
Or did they trick us?
Yeah,
That's
actually,
true.
yeah. We've been
Yeah,
tricked.
who's running who here?
Yeah.
I'm just a driver. His nose is always on, but at the same time, he has a memory as well. So we're coming up to a spot he knows is a good spot.
Yeah.
So we'll see if he'll probably go nose first, but also instinct as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he may also just associate this spot with being given chorizo and peas.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's fair to say. Yeah, because he's food motivated.
Yeah.
So he's walked past there, which is a spot where we found quite a few in the past, and he's dismissed it.
So he's doing a quick scan through.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly to know whether it's worth
Just to double check, I think. But really,
Yeah.
I think he probably knew that 30 metres up the path.
Do you think he looks at it like we do when we go past the clearance section in the supermarket and they've got something really good on there this one time? So you go and check every other time. Oh, are we on?
Something's caught his nose.
So Amy's dog has this because there's one particular bush in a park where in the town she used to work in where he always used to check because once he found half a kebab.
Yeah.
Oh, what a day for him.
He associates that bush with kebabs now. So
You should go back and plant one.
you train the dog on kebab oil. How did you train Tembo?
So we got him at 8 weeks, and we started off with an old sock with a wooden ball in, infused with truffle oil, and we just played hide and seek around the house.
Yeah.
And every time he found the sock, he got a piece of cheese. So being the greedy so-and-so that he is, he liked that game and wanted to play it more and more. So he's just interested in the spot at the moment, so we'll see if he gives it a scratch or not. What we do sometimes find is I can see a molehill there, so we'll see animal holes. He'll scratch and reveal an animal hole, so
Right.
there's something that's similar in the smell, I guess.
Or could it be that hole goes along
Yeah.
to something,
Yeah.
goes to some mycelial thread? There's somebody over there. We're going to have to pretend we're not doing this now. How secretive do you have to be?
I talk to people about it, but I'd never reveal my spot. So this is outside of my comfort zone, should we say, today.
Okay.
I trust you too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
I feel like the first time you go to a new discount.
I'll take your word for it, Richard.
It's sort of, I feel a bit furtive doing this. I feel like I shouldn't be out here doing it. The secretiveness has got to me. So I could see you sort of switch on there. You got the dog more engaged, but the dog ahead of you.
Yeah, I just know that this area is, particularly when we get to the corner, we're in Truffle country.
So we're in.
Oh, here we go.
Oh.
False alarm.
False alarm. Oh, excited then. So this is a mature beech woodland on limestone, well drained, and it's sort of terraced. And that's probably as much description as I can give without giving the location away. So I'd expect to see more of this kind of stuff in the hillier parts of the Midlands, parts of Devon as well would look a little bit like this, but it's a limestone.
The limestone's important, but also chalk as well. So there's a big
Okay.
band of chalk that goes from, the Jurassic coast in the west, kind of right across to East Anglia, and then
Yeah.
up into parts of limestone, I guess it is, in the Peak District, but then more chalk, I think, on the east coast. So if you overlay an alkaline soil, so chalk or limestone, the right aspect, the right trees, you have a trained dog, then you put all those elements together and you're in with a shot. I just know that this spot in the past has produced,
Right.
which is why I'm halfway down an embankment. Oh, here we go.
Oh, I see. So there's a chunk, is that a chunk here?
I think that is a chunk, yeah, but then if you look
Yeah.
here, I probably say that's quite
That's
immature based on the colour. So
that looks mycelial though. You've got
Well,
that vibe to it.
what you can see there, so you can see what's called the gleba. So the outer of the truffle,
Yeah.
the black pyramidal warty thing, is called the peridium. And then the inside, which is kind of marbled, mottled.
Yeah.
And as we go through the season, we'll turn from quite a light white we can see here to more of a mushroom kind of brown colour. You can see there's a few little bits of it that have come off there.
Oh yeah, but it's definitely got the scent, hasn't it?
Richard, if you just gently want to give that a little bit of a scrape and see if we can work that truffle out.
I will give it a scrape. Right, excavate it around.
Yeah.
Is it always a kind of bun shape? Like round with a bit of a fold in the middle?
I mean, typically, but not always.
Oh, yeah. So you sort of, eventually you'll get behind it then. So you can kind of work out the overall shape based on if this is a round shape and it's that wide, it must be that far back.
Yeah.
So this is the thing about where it sits on, is it uprooting or not, I suppose. It'd be difficult to come here and say, well, I'm not digging. Okay, so I just sort of,
Just ease it out.
I'm going with the back of the tool so it's not sharp.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. So, I think that's it. Wow.
Is that your first truffle?
That is my first truffle.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing out to do this. I really mean that. Well done, Tembo.
The quality of truffles are different.
Yeah.
It's a burgundy truffle versus the white Alba, which is probably 5,000 plus a kilo at the moment in the UK. In Italy. And with that value comes the mafia.
So when I used to do commercial foraging, it was with a business. So in the UK, everything was done legitimate and legally, but the country it was going into, actually, I'm not working with them now, so I can say that we were sending it to Hong Kong. It was going to restaurants in Hong Kong, and everything there basically was being handled by the triads or somebody on the other end of that. Yeah. So some of, not the price we were seeing for picking it in the UK, but the price that was being paid by the restaurants there included a fee to the triads, included a fee to organised crime. And it was, I'm not saying that's one of the reasons we stopped, but it was always there in the back of my mind. In the UK here, most wild food that is forage that you'll see in a restaurant there's a very high likelihood, there's a greater than 50% chance, I would say, that it is illegally harvested in some way, because either it was picked commercially without the landowner's permission or from a triple SI or something like that. You can read about this online. It's an open secret, but on that competition thing for commercial foraging, that exists for mushrooms. So that exists for mushroom foraging in the New Forest. A friend on Edge of Dartmoor who forages for restaurants there works with an estate. There are commercial foragers who come from London illegally over there to collect mushrooms. He has had the window smashed out on his van. He has had tires slashed. He's been threatened there. I've got another friend over on the edge of the New Forest who does it there, and they've had the same thing. He's had people basically walk up to him and say, "Hand me that basket, otherwise violence will occur." You wouldn't think it was true, but once you get to money, once you get to a level of money being given which makes it worthwhile breaking the law, then that moral and ethical thing sort of slips by. Yeah. And again, I'm really interested in where that sits for individuals, where it sits for people, and like the culture around wild food that we have as a result.
And if we draw comparisons of what's happening in other countries, so we've already talked about Italy, but that, without going into too much detail, that supply chain is pretty much mafia managed. Yeah. And you have the wild hunters that are going out. Is it their land? Are they allowed to access it? Who knows? But they're going out in the dead of night. Their dog's got a muzzle on. They don't want to give away their spots. They're scared because dogs are being poisoned. There was one incident very recently where 25 dogs died in one night due to poisoning in one specific area.
So they baited it just for those?
Absolutely. They baited it to wipe out a geographical area of competing dogs. Yeah, I think that's a false alarm.
False alarm? Oh.
I think so. Yeah, it could be a mole, could be a mouse hole or something. But again, as we talked about earlier, that there's channeling the smell.
Yeah. Is that almost an issue with having them too close together? Like if you find...
No, I always... if I'm on my own, I'll always double check the spot, because the number of times I've found a second truffle just underneath the surface,
Right.
always worth checking.
It's like metal detecting.
It's with the dog.
You know what? I wonder whether there's a overlap here between metal detecting and truffle hunting. You know, you need to go to a certain bit of land. There's legal side to it.
Yeah.
You need equipment. Tembo here is equipment. And there's a lot of false alarms, a lot of patience required. But when you find it, it's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, I can see the comparisons. Yeah, definitely.
Right. This is truffle metal detecting. That's what it is.
See this one here? Good boy. So did you see how far we've come off the path, and he made a beeline for that? So it's that one. So it's a different type. So this is called tuber excavatum. So it's not so good for eating, but it's still an interesting truffle.
It's a truffle.
Yeah.
It's still a truffle.
Are you going to sniff the soil, Richard?
Oh yeah, let's sniff the soil. Yeah.
Are you getting anything?
Yeah, definitely am. So soil sniffing is a valid way to spend your time.
It's really hard to distinguish from...
Get your nose. You have to do a big breath.
Oh, yeah.
It's there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I don't know why, but we've only ever found excavatum once last year, and that's twice today, 3 times in a week.
So is maybe the temperature over the summer, because it hasn't really got that cold. It's just been wet. So the continual moisture might make a difference.
There's talk about it being a terrible season in Italy.
Yeah.
And other parts of Europe. There's floods in Italy at the moment, so the white truffle, the Alba truffle, the season has been delayed. They're not finding much at all. Because of the hot summers that we're having, certainly in Europe, the yields are down year over year, decade over decade. And yet we're getting more rain in the UK. And from a truffle perspective, you probably call it Goldilocks weather. You know, it's right in that sweet spot. There's enough rain, there's enough sun to produce really good truffles in this country.
So
and that's what we're seeing.
Because we're starting to get more of the climate to the middle of France, really, aren't we? That's kind of what's coming to the UK. Fewer cold winters, but a bit more rain.
Yeah.
So the average temperature's overall higher, but it might not feel it because it's wetter. To the human, anyway.
So if you draw a comparison with wine, you can see that there's some sparkling wine, English sparkling wines in the south.
Yeah.
Which is on chalk, which is award-winning now. And there's talk of British wines in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, really challenging the best French wines in the world. As the climate shifts and changes, are we going to see the same in truffles?
Yeah, that's an interesting one to pick away at. Because when we speak to people who grow things for a living, not just farmers, but we've got the vineyards around here in North Wales. I was talking to somebody the other day about sweet chestnuts, which don't really grow in North Wales, but the people are starting to coppice and plant them here now. Do we have to look ahead and see what we're going to be getting, maybe with that changing climate?
I suspect so, yeah. In fact, absolutely. So I hunt for 7 truffle farmers in the northwest. So around Shropshire, Staffordshire, North Wales, and also in the Lake District. And I think that's what they've done. They've looked at what's happening in mainland Europe. They're hearing about cultivated truffles. And they've also looked at the numbers as well. And they think, well, if I can generate an income of £20,000 an acre, then why would I not do it?
Yeah.
But then you've got to consider that, well, you might produce in year 4, or you might produce in year 10. So you might have all of that work and investment that goes into setting up the truffier, liming the soil if you're not on an alkaline soil, paying for the trees, the husbandry of the trees, the cutting of the grass every season, every month. And then there's a lot of science behind it, but there's also a little bit of luck. So you're not guaranteed to have a crop at year 10.
It's a lot of work for a non-guaranteed result or an unreliable result.
But then there's some guys that have done it
Yeah.
You know, it's a very young industry in the UK. It's 15 years old. There's people that are in year 12, 13, 14, 15 now that are way ahead of the market and are getting 700 to £1,000 a kilo. And at the moment, some of those guys are easily finding 2, 3, 4 kilos a week between now and December.
How many people do you think are out there actively hunting for truffles in the wild in the UK? You know, we're in a managed woodland now, but let's call this the wild
Yeah.
because it's not a farm.
I'd hazard a guess and say 100, maybe 150 in the UK. It's quite secretive, but also you don't get the competition that you see in Italy and France. You know, I've got friends that hunt in Italy that have been shot at, dogs have been poisoned. It's a real serious business there. In the UK, hunting in the wild is for fun and for pride and for enjoyment and grounding yourself. You're not going to make a fortune out of, well, A, you've got to get planning permission off the landowner, and B, you've seen what we found today.
Yeah.
It'd be a hard living even if you could find someone to sell them to.
Yeah, that's the thing as well. It's not a guaranteed market, and you've got to have that route to market as well.
Yeah.
Saying it's worth this. It's only worth that if you can sell it.
It's worth what someone will pay. And I'll give you an analogy, which is if I go and poach from the River Dee
Yep.
and catch a salmon and then knock on the back door of any restaurant in Chester or North Wales, out of 100 restaurants, how many times do you think I'm going to sell that salmon?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to buy. You know, this is all about provenance of ingredients, knowing the supply chain. So,
Yeah, and often it's the customer dictates when they want it as well, not necessarily the availability. They say, well, we want this on the menu. Why haven't you got it?
yeah. And all Michelin-starred chefs are buying grade A or grade B truffle. So grade A will probably be golf ball to tennis ball sized, pretty round, perfect peridium, great aroma, great marble in the gleba inside. Or they'll be buying grade B, which will have all that, but might have been a little bit nibbled by an animal, or might be a misshapen truffle that you wouldn't shave at the table, but you'd use back of house.
And early in the season where we are now, what you found today, the first 2 truffles, are they grade C, grade D?
I mean, they're grade B, grade C.
Grade B, grade C.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
like there's a grade B side to it, there's a grade C side
Yeah.
on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'd probably, if that was from a commercial truffier, then you'd chop off all of the nibble. You'll get the odd dog claw scratching as well, which, you know, chefs aren't going to want. So you got to think of all of that work to go in to find grade A truffles. You know, you might be finding half a dozen a season, and that it's not a business.
No, because it's not just the cost of coming out here, it's the cost of living and being out and doing stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just the cost of that individual activity. You've got to have a wage and the house and a mortgage and stuff like that. There's somebody walking along there with a guidebook open. Okay. So I wonder whether they're mushroom hunting. You know, it's at this time of year, if I see somebody walking through with an open guidebook looking at the ground, they're after mushrooms.
So, Richard and Amy, I've got a little gift here for you. So,
What's
if you
this?
want to have a look at this is a camembert with a layer of wild truffle in the middle. So, my advice is to bake it for maybe 15 minutes until it goes really oozy and melty cheese, and get some fresh bread and dip it and scoop and the like. So, there's that in there, and there's also some truffles as well.
Oh, the smell of that is amazing.
Oh, wow.
So
wow.
Are there 2 different types of truffle?
Yeah, so we've got the what we call the burgundy truffle, or the Latin name is Tuva estivum var uncunatum.
Yeah.
So the summer/autumn truffle, and then we have this bottom-shaped truffle.
It does look like a bum.
Which is called Tuba excavatum, which is not really an eater, but it's not going to do you any harm either.
Where were these found?
So these were found in North Wales last Friday, I think.
Last Friday.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And in terms of, so that you can see they're in really good condition. They've still got the soil on.
Yeah.
So my advice is, when you find truffles, put them in a plastic box, Wrap them in a paper towel. Change the paper towel every 24 hours, as it'll hold on to the moisture. If it starts to pick up any mold, just give them a little brush. Before you use them, clean them with some kind of nail brush type brush until all of the soil is gone, and then grate or shave over something with fat in, creamy based, a pasta, risotto, or if you've got a particularly nice piece of steak as well. So you want to be shaving them on rather than cooking the truffle.
And I've heard these work better with sort of animal proteins. It's the vegan option for these is always going to be slightly harder to get the flavour to work.
Yeah,
I mean, there was a chef friend who told me that, so I don't know. They could be talking completely out of the bum.
I mean, I would go with something creamy and pasta.
While we're talking here, this sort of smells coming over me. It's got this. There's a sharpness to a smell of a truffle, but I think there's something like milk that's slightly on the turn in there. I think. It's like I could get the edge of that.
I don't get that, but it's something my daughter moans about constantly, which is, I've got a truffle fridge or a spare fridge in the garage.
Yeah.
She'll go and get a drink from there and she'll complain that it smells of milk.
This is...
There's 80 plus different types of truffle in the UK. Some of them smell of... rotting flesh. There's others that give off a gasoline type smell. So it's almost like wine in terms of the spectrum of smells that you're going to get. Yeah,
we say this when we're on the foraging courses, even with plants and things, that if it's something that's safe to handle, you should try and get used to the smell of it as well, because the smell is as much an identifier for some of these things. It's often, well, it looks like this and it's the right habitat. Oh yeah, that smell. Yeah, it couldn't be anything else. It's often the thing that tips you into it could be that. And getting my nose right into the ground today, smelling where those truffles were, I can get a sense a little bit, like 1% of what Tembo, or 0.1% of what Tembo is getting there. Because you can't use them all in one go. What's the best way to preserve that? Just keep it dry it slowly, or as you said, with
I mean, you can have a go at. Probably the best carrier is butter.
Right.
So clean them, mince them, mix them with a good quality butter, some salt and pepper, and that'll last for 2 weeks and it'll last for 3 months in a freezer. So without giving anything away, so I've got a couple of irons in the fire. One that hopefully is going to come off this year is I've got a charcuterie guy not too far away from me who's going to have a play around with them, see if he can create some kind of truffle saucisson. And if that works, it might be something that we'll do each year just as a limited edition thing.
You're binding it to something that will preserve for longer.
We need the high fat content to preserve it.
Okay. Interesting.
Nice.
So this is not our woodland. We're on a public footpath right now. Everything we've done here has been on the edge of a public footpath. Foraging, there's nothing in the Highways Act in the UK that says you cannot forage whilst doing so. We regularly forage from the side of footpaths, picking blackberries, wild garlic, whatever you want to say, including mushrooms. There's the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which has, if it's above ground and it's not an endangered species, then, and it's not a triple SI or anything like that, you can take that item. But if it's below ground, you can't. So the truffles are they're on that cusp, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. So I'd describe it as crowning. So, underleaf litter, but kind of half to 3/4 above the soil in some instances, a little bit below. So you're kind of plucking the truffle from the surface. I would never dig in a triple SI site. I'd always ask for landowners' permission, and most of my truffling is done in truffiers in planted orchards across the UK.
It's at the request of the landowner, a lot of your stuff, isn't it? Which is completely the opposite way around. That I can see, we were talking about this at the other woodland before we came here. I can see actually how you can see it as a grey area and how it's interpreted as that, because looking at the stuff today, it's under leaf litter more than soil. It's just that in a woodland like this, a thick deciduous woodland, the top bit of soil is leaf litter. You put your finger in, almost half finger's depth is all leaves. It's this year's leaves, last year's leaves, the year before, and then it starts becoming soil, and the truffle is on that meridian between the two.
Right then, this being the public side of the episode, because there's a different version of this on our Patreon feed. In that version, Jonathan and I just carried on having a discussion which turned into a little bit of a debate about the law and the interpretation of particularly the Wildlife and Countryside Act as it relates to gathering truffles and mushrooms and things that are on the zone between being overground, underground. If you want to listen to that discussion, again, it's on our Patreon version, but I think there's some real value in going through what the law actually says, because this podcast, the whole podcast, is tied to our work teaching people about wild food. And in that, we spend a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, but we spend enough time talking about wild food law, ecology law, conservation law, and how it relates to foraging and wild food in the UK. This is not necessarily a judgment on that, or the fairness of those laws, or whether they're appropriate for the modern age, or whether they were even appropriate for the time they were written. But what we try and do is say, like, this is what the law says. Do with that what you will. So this is section 13 for the Wildlife and Countryside Act. There's a link to this, a link straight to this section, I think, in our show description, so you can read it for yourself. But for England and Wales, and there's a Scottish version, but it more or less says the same thing. For England and Wales, it says, number 1, subject to the provisions of this part, if any person, A, intentionally picks, uproots, or destroys any wild plant included in Schedule 8, or B, not being an authorised person, intentionally uproots any wild plant not included in that schedule, he shall be guilty of an offence. So there are a couple of things in that. One is that Schedule 8 is the list of protected species for wild plants and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that includes things like bluebells, which are not rare in the UK, but they are rare in the rest of Europe, and we hold the last sort of reserve of native true bluebells that aren't hybridized with weird Spanish bluebells. Yeah. Or there are orchids that are just rare everywhere, and there are lots of things on there that are protected species. So even if it's your land, you can't touch, you shouldn't be destroying, trampling on, uprooting, digging up, moving from place to place without a license. That's what Schedule 8 is. So if you intentionally pick, uproot, or destroy any wild plant in Schedule 8, you will be guilty of an offence. And B, not being an unauthorised person. So an authorised person is if you have permission. It's either your land.
Permission from the landowner or
it's
yourself.
Your land. Yeah. If you intentionally uproot any wild plant not included in that schedule, so that's anything that's not rare, that's not protected elsewhere, it's just uprooting it. So that is the word, uproot. The problem comes with the fact that in the Wildlife and Countryside Act, because in this particular area, it links on often to the Theft Act and how things are described elsewhere in law, mushrooms are not separated out from plants.
No.
We talk about this a lot in our courses, and just everyone knows this now, that mushrooms are not plants, they're not animals, they have their own kingdom, they are separated out entirely. But that wasn't always the case. They were seen as being subsets of plants.
Yeah, they were classified as non-flowering plants officially up until 1969. That's when fungi became their own kingdom.
Yeah, so. But even in the early 80s, when the Wildlife and Countryside Act was enacted, they were still seen in law as being plants.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at that and going, well, it doesn't say I can't dig up mushrooms, in law, on the current understanding, until there's a test case and someone comes along and says, actually, yeah, this is what the new definition of the law is by that case, mushrooms are classed as plants. If it's the thing about uprooting, now, mushrooms don't have roots.
No, they don't.
They are the fruiting bodies from a mycelial network underground, or in a growing medium, a tree, or something like that. But in terms of how it is interpreted in the Wildlife and Countryside Act, because a case hasn't gone to court yet, I would say that as mushrooms are classed as plants, and uprooting is the act of uprooting, even though they don't have roots, it could be argued, and this would be the job of very expensive people in wigs, to argue that that is the case. And this comes to the thing then of where truffles sit within that, because if your dog, you're probably a dog, not a pig, as Jonathan said.
Most likely.
They find a truffle. It's under the leaf litter, but the top is visible above the soil, but the rest of it's under the soil. Are you uprooting it?
And this is the sticking point, really.
Yeah,
because it's not for us to say for certain either way.
It's a grey. This is the thing that everyone refers to it as a grey area, and it's not. It's only a grey area because there hasn't been a case. That's the point. That
is.
But a grey area doesn't mean that it's not known. It doesn't mean that no one knows. It just means that no, there hasn't been a case against it, and you have to take your interpretation from other cases then and other things related to that law and how it is interpreted elsewhere.
It's a tricky one because it's how the organism is described as a whole, because the truffle is akin to a fruit on a tree.
Yeah.
But it's a fruit that's growing partially underground.
Yeah.
On a tree that grows entirely underground, almost.
Yeah. So my best guess on this, just to hurry it along, but this is sort of why it ended up as kind of not a debate, but we were trying to keep the content going in person with Jonathan, but there is actually something to explain here. My understanding is, and my guess is, that if it did for some reason come up that somebody was digging up truffles somewhere on some land that they didn't have permission to do it from, and for some reason the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, or whoever decided to bring this as a prosecution, and this is actually in the public interest to prosecute, which is very unlikely.
Highly.
That they did bring it to court, it could be argued successfully that act doesn't refer to mushrooms. It refers to plants. The modern understanding is of plants. The average person looking things up now would see that mushrooms aren't plants. There's enough to say that mushrooms aren't plants, that it's not clear enough for there to be a definite prosecution here, for it to be a clear thing in law.
Yeah.
So it's unlikely that a prosecution would occur. It's unlikely that a prosecution would be successful. And the understanding of what mushrooms are and the wording around all of this has changed so significantly in the last 40 odd years that this is pretty much irrelevant. But that doesn't remove the point that technically, I think this is illegal if it's underground enough. If an average person can look at you digging up the soil around a truffle, as I was in this podcast,
excavating it
to say that you are not uprooting.
Yeah.
But I would say that it doesn't really matter, is my personal opinion. Not a grey area, it's an undefined area because there hasn't been a case of prosecution against it.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's the important thing to take away here, and that's how a lot of wild food law actually sits. It says this, but people breach that. People break that law all the time. It's just not prosecuted because it's not worth it. It's not in the public interest to prosecute. No. Unless there have been prosecutions under the Wildlife and Countryside Act for things like selling species that are protected, or digging up species that are protected, like bluebells and things like that. Disturbing protected species, there have been successful prosecutions under that. That is quite happily locked down in law. Digging up mushrooms, as far as I know, there is no case, and I have tried to look it up.
Yep. If you have any sort of insight into this from a legal perspective, because that's your field of work or your field of expertise, then it would be really interesting to know your take on this.
Yep.
So please do write in. If you want to remain anonymous for whatever reason, that's fine. Yep. But we would happily read out and go over any of those points, because it's an interesting part of wild food, this whole law side of it, particularly when it's clear when it's theft, if you're going to be picking stuff and selling it without speaking to the landowner. But when it comes to or personal use of foraged items, it's
personal use. It's not a protected species. It's not a protected area. You say it's public access for being there, and it's on a public footpath, and all those things are covered. If you were digging up something that's half underground, half overground, I don't think I'd say you can carry on enjoying your happy day. I'd say you've probably broken more laws that week than you realise doing something else.
Quite probably.
So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but we'll link out to this particular section so people can read it for themselves, and let us know what you think. Right, let's back on with the episode.
If someone's listening to this and they're thinking, well, I've got an orchard that's been there, I don't know, it's been there 10 years, and I've wondered if there are truffles there, can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
How would they do that? What's the best way?
Okay, so either through social media, so through Jonathan McGowan on Instagram, or if they search for me, through LinkedIn, they can contact me that way.
So if you find, we'll link this out in as well in the notes to this episode.
Yeah.
If there's anybody listening that has acres of beech, oak, hazel, birch, relatively flat in the northwest, on limestone predominantly, get in touch and we'll run the dog over.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I've really enjoyed today. Thank you, and thank you, Tembo.
Yes, thank you, Tembo.
very quiet
thank
now
you,
on the street.
It's like a mop has gone to sleep in the back of the car.
It's been a
He's
pleasure.
up for
Really
it.
enjoyed it. Really enjoyed your company.
Thanks, man. I really enjoyed it.